This video is the second video of a series of probably 3 videos in which I discuss the philosophy of games, or the philosophy of playing, from a Hegelian perspective, and I would like to reflect upon a very famous quote, an extract from the preface to the Phenomenology of Spirits from Hegel, which says in English, "The life of God and divine intelligence then can, if we like, be spoken of as love disporting with itself, but this idea falls into edification and even sinks into insipidity if it lacks the seriousness, the suffering, the patience, and the labor of the negative." So, if all things are made in the image of God, and if the process of God is a process of a game played by love with itself, which includes negativity and suffering in the process, then the whole of reality should reflect, to a certain extent, this ambiguity of the relationship between playing a game and suffering and danger, but also love and reward. And this is what I have tried to show in the first part of the video, and I will continue, and I will use as a chronological thread this book, Games and Men, which is a book by a sociologist, a French sociologist, upon the question of games. And I am commenting the introduction. I will put in the description below the structure of the video. I have already discussed, I think, 6 points in the first video, so I continue. I begin by a few remarks about games in general. The book says that a game can be defined partly as the will to impose rules upon oneself, to limit one's freedom in order to confront a situation where the limit forces one to be able to transcend oneself in a way, by using either intelligence or strength or cunning or strategy or resources or perseverance or management. Or this is the broad definition of a game, the willing restriction upon one's own liberty for the sake of gaining a higher liberty, maybe. And there's a French expression which says jouer le jeu, which literally translated means playing the game. And jouer le jeu means to accept the rules of the game that you are playing, and to try to be as honest as you can, and to accept the negative aspects of the game that you're involved in, and try to play by the rules, even if you might not enjoy the rules. You have to do your best to accept them, so to speak. Now we'll talk about, in the realm of sports, which is game as entertainment, but sports, I take the example of football, which is what the Americans call soccer. Football and soccer is a game, but it can be a violent game. It is restricted and limited by rules, and there is order, which should be ideally respected upon the playing field, upon the pitch. But there can be serious injuries, broken bones, acts of violence, brawls between the players. And I will take example drawn from European soccer, very famous examples, but I'm sure that whoever you are, and even if you are not familiar at all with football and football games, you can draw examples from your own personal experience in rugby or American football or basketball or whatever. in soccer or football in the European sense, there are forbidden behaviors on the pitch. When you enter upon a football field, you enter a playing field and you have to abide by the rules, and there are certain kinds of behavior which are forbidden. And if you transcend if you trespass the rule of the game, you will be punished. If you are lucky, in a sense, the referee won't see you, but with the development of modern videos, everything is seen. It's a parallel to the development of internet. Whatever people say on the internet becomes available to all, so we are constantly being watched by what we say. Every word that we say can be potentially watched by the whole internet community of 4 billion users, whatever. And there are violent behaviors, and it is the same, I guess, in basketball. There is trash talking, there are brawls and fights on the playing field, and there are very famous villain figures in European soccer, mostly in England. Players like Roy Keane, the player for Manchester United, Cantona, who is famous for having kicked a football fan violently, Vinnie Jones. These are the kind of figures of the bad boys that the public, the football fans, love to hate or hate to love. The relationship is ambiguous. These are hated figures. Cantona is admired and Roy Keane is admired by the Manchester United fans, but they are kind of despised as football players, by other teams. So the relationship between love and hatred is ambiguous because, And a character like José Mourinho, when he was in his prime, 10 or 15 years ago, he was admired and feared and respected by many. He was the special one, and he was loved fanatically by his own players and by his own fans, but he created controversy and conflict, and he was kind of despised by all other fans and by the media, but the media loved to hate him. So everyone hated Mourinho, but everyone loved him nonetheless. So he was kind of an ambiguous figure because everyone loved to hate Mourinho or hated to love him. So it was an ambiguous relationship. And he's the embodiment of negativity in the realm of football managers of the years, the 2000s and the 2010s. Yeah. And his struggle, his epic confrontation against Guardiola, when he was the manager of Inter Milan or Real Madrid, and Guardiola was the manager of Barcelona, was a dramatic moment in the history of soccer. And it is, for those who watched the confrontation back then, it was one of the greatest moments, one of the most epic moments in the history of soccer, because it was a titanic struggle between two giants. There was the positive football of Guardiola and the negative football of Mourinho. But here I will use my knowledge of Hegel's logic to say that Guardiola's football, the total football of Barcelona in their prime, was positive football in a sense, but it was so positive that it became negative in a sense that they were so dominant that they completely negated the opponent, and watching their games, their matches could become for some boring because nothing happened on the pitch. They were so dominant that the opposition was annihilated. So the positive brought about radical negation. And José Mourinho's negative brand of football, that's the ambiguity of the negative, is that people said, oh, it's boring football, it's ugly football, it's violent, he teaches his player to cheat and to simulate and to hit the opponent and to break the pace of the game. But at the same time, his players showed a tremendous amount of courage and resilience and strength. So the negativity of José Mourinho's football produced positive emotions and behaviors in his players by showing a great strength of character. And the teams of José Mourinho were very good at counter-attack football, to play on the break, as they say. So it was ambiguous. And another illustration of the ambiguities of playing games in the realm of soccer, there are figures, I take the example of Sergio Ramos, who are hated by everyone, basically, except the fans of his own team, and the fan of his own team acknowledge that he's kind of a jerk, so to speak, but he's a jerk that the fans love when he's on their own team. If he's on the other team, you hate him, but if he's on your team, you love him. So that's an ambiguous figure. And it's part of the collective psyche of football fans and of playing soccer games. So, yeah. I will put a link to a song by Christina Aguilera, Dirrty, because football can be a dirty game. And in a football game, like in, I guess, every sport, there is a referee. And the referee is the one who is responsible for judging the behavior. And to judge in logic means to subsume a singular determination under a universal determination. So the referee, his role is to judge whether a singular behavior, a tackle, spitting on an opponent, insulting an opponent, hitting an opponent, or whatever, or touching the ball with the hand if you're not allowed, if it is correct in adequation with the rules of the game, or if it is incorrect. So that's a logical syllogism, not a logical syllogism, a logical judgment. And the referee is on a football field what God is on the planetary perspective. God is the judge of behavior, and the referee is the judge of behaviors on a football field, and he watches if the rules of the game are respected, and if the villains are punished and the good guys are not necessarily rewarded, but at least that balance is restored and that justice is made manifest, so that the game can go on and can be played properly, so that entertainment can be produced. Yeah. There's a French expression which says c'est pas du jeu, ce n'est pas du jeu, which literally translated means it's not game, or it's not fair play, so to speak. It means you are cheating. So the idea, and that's a very Hegelian idea, is that in the idea of a game, it is implied that it should be played by the rules, and it must be adequate to its own concept. And Hegel says, to illustrate an example from the logic, that a bad state still contains within itself the idea of the state, but a true state is a state which is adequate to its own concept. And a bad house, a badly built house, you can still recognize the house. So even in a badly built house by a mediocre architect, you can still recognize the idea of the house. But a real house, or a real state, or a real game, according to Hegel's logic, is a game or a house or a state which is in adequation with its concept, namely a good game, a good house, a good state. Yeah. The idea of a football game, but of any game, is that if you break the rules, it's game over. And it might be possible that the penalty for breaking the rules, and that's what Hegel says, of God's game is death. So the price that the negative has to pay, I'm not yet sure that Hegel is correct, but it is to experience death. Plus the suffering, plus the work, plus the seriousness, but there's also death. And it is said that spirit is immortal, but the body perishes, and being into the world might be the experience of dying, and people are afraid of death, and it is said that it is the original sin which brought death into the world in the Christian religion. So yeah. Yeah. So he who breaks the rules of the game is a cheater, and a cheater must be punished. And we find this idea in the realm of sports, but it is also true in the realm of civic life, in civic society. In civic society, the judicial system, the police, the legislative and executive powers are there to make sure that those who break the rules, the criminals, the cheaters, the non-civic behaviors are punished. They bring back the individuals under the guidance of the universality, which is the law, which must be applied to all, and they are here to make sure that the law is respected so that order can be maintained and that the civic life can maintain itself. Yeah. Then the next part, he talks, I don't know if the expression works in English, but about a mechanism or a machine. When a machine, an assembly of gear, a metal gear, a metal instrument, a mechanism, when it can move freely, with fluidity, with ease. In French, we have a word which says le jeu. So literally it would be the game. It's not a game in a sense that it is a game to play. It means that the movement of the mechanical parts are in fluidity, in accordance with one another. They freely move and move with ease through one another. And it is not blocked, it is not restricted, and there is an idea of freedom, in a sense. Freedom within a rigorous assembly, a rigorous structure of the various pieces. So in French we have the word jeu, which is game or play, and I'm not sure that it's the same in English, but it is, if there is the same word, it partly reveals that there is broadly the same idea. So there's the idea of rigor and freedom united, determination and liberty maintained through self-determination and through a coherent and structured organization and functioning of the various parts. Yeah, and he says like it is like a puzzle. And if I had to be honest, and I will try to be honest, in modern pop culture there is a series of movies called Saw, in which there is a psychopath named John Kramer who plays games with his victims, and he's the jigsaw puzzle villain, so to speak. It is part of modern pop culture, so it expresses an aspect of the truth about spirit. So this is a kind of very dangerous and very painful game to play, but it's also a game because there are rules and there are punishments for breaking the rules, and it is an idea about overcoming oneself. So yeah. And the idea of a machine functioning as a game, like I've just defined it, is found in A Clockwork Orange, which is a famous movie of modern pop culture, which I haven't watched, but I know it has had an influence upon the collective psyche. And the counterpart of this mechanistic, I wouldn't say destructive, but kind of destructive process is an elastic fluidity. And I will put a link to the song Elastic Heart, which expresses ideas about the nature of spirit as well. So there's this polarity between mechanism and elasticity, rigor at the risk of causing suffering, and fluidity, which enables freedom. And yeah, this is also part of the structure of games. He says that there are multiple, varied, wealthy, rich meanings of the word game, of the idea of playing. And the psychological disposition, the psychological faculties which are developed by the idea of a game, not playing just for fun, but the whole structure, limiting oneself in order to transcend oneself, to respect the rules, to have a civic or civil relationship with the other, enables the development of civilization. And there's this idea of totality, of rules or determinations or limits, and also liberty. So the whole problem of a game is to maintain one's liberty within one's self-determination, to accept to be free within restriction. That's the most difficult thing to do, because it's tempting to wish to break the rules, to not care about the rules of the game and to become a cheater. That's very tempting. But one must overcome the temptation and to accept to play by the rules. Yeah. Then he says that when one is confronted by any kind of game, one has to make the best use, to manage as best as one can the resources that one has inherited, and to seek to win by using one's own intimate resources, so one's own inner strength, the inalienable character, the inalienable character of one's own inner strength, and which are only dependent on zeal and perseverance, to persevere in the face of adversity. And God has endowed man with an inner spark of divine light, I guess, which enable each man to remain true to himself in the most difficult of circumstances, whatever the hardships that men are confronted by and are standing in the middle of. They can retreat within their own inner strength, their own inner light, and to confront the hardships, the external events, no matter how bad they may appear, by retreating within oneself, within one's own thought. And that's a very important element of Hegel's philosophy. This is what the ancient philosopher called Stoicism. And in times of difficulty, men tend to become stoic. So when the danger grows and the struggle grows, the inner strength and the inner character of man grows as well in a proportionate relationship. So he says that, in a broad outline, the idea of rules and limitations on the one hand, and the idea of liberty and invention or creativity are two poles of a polarity which subsist in a common relationship. So yeah. Then about just a remark. I envision the possibility that someday in the distant future, the Buddhists or the Hindus or the Tibetans or the Eastern wise men may look at the negative and laugh at the negative, because from a Western perspective, we and I maybe tend to make things a lot more complicated than they should be, whereas in the Eastern spirituality things are a lot more simple, and the Westerners tend to overcomplicate to an insane extent, one might say, very simple things. So one day, someday maybe, the Eastern wise men will laugh at me for my over complexification of things, and maybe I will be resentful a little bit, but I will try to find appeasement in their laughter, and to maybe a masochistic tendency of mine will enjoy being laughed at by those who are wiser than the Western man with his will to conceptualize everything, whereas in the end everything might just end up being nothing. And why not think about nothing directly? Why do you have to go through the whole process of thinking about everything? Isn't that a little bit too complicated? So yeah. Also, now we enter the realm of civic life and the judicial system. So my explanation and my comment of this introduction is partly Hegelian, although it's not strictly organized. It's a chronological order, or not a logical order. But there's this idea that we find the idea of a game not necessarily having fun and enjoying oneself, but the idea that I have been developing throughout the past video and the first 25 minutes of this video. We find this reflection, which if in Hegel's view is the very structure of God, in all spheres of life. And civic society, civic life, legislation, the realm of constitution, of right or of law, of the institution of the police, the justice, the judicial system, and so on and so forth, they are kind of a game in a sense that it is a self-imposed limitation of freedom when you enter a civic society and a civilized society. And even primitive tribes are civilized because they obey to a certain rules, although these rules are not written. There are rules in every human society. This is a basic knowledge of anthropology. But in the civilized society where the law becomes impersonal and trans-tribal and written and made manifest to all through the written word, the civic life is a game in a sense that one has to obey the rules or face the risk of being punished. And the first motive for adopting legislation and law is to prevent men from killing one another. But then there are rewards to be earned because a law-abiding citizen, someone who pays taxes, who respects the rules, who doesn't cheat, who doesn't steal, etc., etc., he can have a feeling of self-worth by saying, I'm a good citizen. I may not be a hero, but at least I'm not a villain, so I am an honest citizen, a hardworking, I pay my taxes, I respect the rules, yeah. And the purpose of punishment is not to exert revenge, or it shouldn't be the purpose of exerting revenge upon he who has broken the rule, but it is to help the criminal or the offender recognize that he deserves to be punished, and he, in order to liberate himself from the guilt of having broken the rule, he must acknowledge that his punishment is part of the crime that he perpetrated. That's an idea that I draw from Hegel, but I guess that Hegel was right. In order to be free, a criminal must acknowledge that in the idea of the crime, there comes the idea of the punishment, and he must recognize the punishment as being the logical consequence of his crime, and therefore he must recognize his own freedom in his own punishment, which is very difficult, but yeah. And also, lawyers and judges in the Western world, they are the keepers of the social order, and they play a role. The judges are dressed in a certain fashion, they obey a certain code of conduct, a certain mode and code of behavior, and they are putting on an act, they are playing a character, and it's part of the social process. And yeah, so this was the idea that I wanted to develop, and I will make a third video in which I will conclude probably, but yeah.